Hi, so here we are. We're going to analyze Skrillex, Scary Monsters, and Nice Sprites. Um, so we're looking at melodies now, is what we just talked about in the last lesson. So in this one, we're going to find the chord progression, and we're also going to look at how the melody that he uses here fits in with the chord progression. So let's have a listen to a little bit of it. And the part we're going to analyze is pretty much this recurring melody chord progression thing that happens. And this track basically has two sections and then some other stuff. But the sections are this nice, actually really kind of happy melody with the chord progression, and then this big gnarly bass stuff. So we're not going to focus on the big gnarly bass stuff, but I am going to talk about it for just a touch. So let's listen to a little bit. Okay, so let's dive in by talking about that section we just heard last, where we've got this big, huge bass sound. So in terms of what we're talking about chords and melodies. So when we look at sections like this, what is the chord is the first question we would ask ourselves. And for this kind of music in this kind of section, we might just label it as no chord, is the way we say it. We don't really hear a harmony happening in that section. We hear a bass line, and the bass line is moving between notes. So we could figure out a chord, but there's not really a chord sounding. So a lot of the times we would just say no chord in this section, and then we might just figure out what the notes of the bass line are, because they are notes, and it is in a key. He is sticking to a key when he plays those bass lines. But it doesn't really have to fit against a chord because it's just this kind of big gnarly sound, and there's no real vertical aligning of chords. So he's just kind of playing notes that work in a particular key. Now in the next lesson, we're going to look at bass lines a little bit. We're not going to get into sound design and like how to make those big like dubsteps kind of bass lines. That gets into sound design, which is way out of the scope of this class. So I would love to do a whole nother class just on sound design. Maybe I will. But for now, we're just talking about notes and chords. So let's get back to this other part that's a little bit easier to wrap our head around. So in this we have a chord. This part we have a chord progression and we have a melody. So let's hear it one more time. Okay, so listening for the chords here are actually pretty easy because they all sound to me like their root position. So I figured out. Let's do this. We'll turn off that one for now. I figured out what I hear as the roots of the chords. We basically have this D sharp or E flat, and then these two notes go by really quick and in passing. So they could be a whole chord. We could build chords on these, or we could just say they're passing bass notes, just like we had passing melody notes, just melody notes that weren't in the chord. We could say these are passing bass notes, and that's okay. That's allowed. Why not? Or we could decide that they're chords. So we'll figure that out when we get there. Let's just hear my bass line and the track. Let's pull the volume of the track down just a touch. And let's hear the two of them together. Okay, so when we need to figure out the key, I'm going to try a little bit different experiment to show you another way to think about the key, because the key that we're going to be working in is not the first note here. Remember, that was one of the things that that wasn't a tell to tell us if that was in fact the key, but that was one clue we had to figure out what key it was. We could figure out the whole scale, but let's try one other thing. This one's a little harder to do, but it can be useful. It requires you to listen really close. So what we're going to listen for is, imagine that for every chord we hear, something is lifting up, and then for some chords, it settles down on the ground. So we're going up and down. Now, which chords sound like we've gone down and we're like comfortable and sitting down? So some chords feel like we're lifting up and some feel like we're just like settled in and comfortable. The ones that feel like we're settled in and comfortable, those are probably the key. So think about it while I play it one more time. Now it's a little tricky here to use that analogy because the bass line is actually moving up between these three notes. But this one, this G, does feel like a settling down. Even though the pitch is going up, it feels like comfortable. Like we could stop on that. End of song. Bum, and it stops. We could stop on that chord and it would feel fine. That's a good indication of the key if you can just stop there. And it doesn't feel like you're like hanging in the air, right? If we stopped on like this F, for example, it has a little bit of suspense to it. You're like, you didn't quite stop on the right note. Like I need to hear it resolve is what we would call that. So let's go into the assumption that G is our key. So using that as a starting point, I can draw out all the notes that I need. Let's take this down an octave, make it nice and short. I'm just going to draw my scale. Half, whole, whole, half, whole. Lovely. There's all my possible notes. Now, am I in key? Let's find out. Do I have all the notes in the bass line that fit into this? So here is a D sharp. Right there's a D sharp. Good. There's an F. There's an F. There's a G. Obviously, G fits. There's another F. There's a G and an F. So all these notes fit. So it's a good candidate. That's not a slam dunk, but it's a pretty good candidate. So let's go with G minor. And I'm going to guess minor because, I drew out a minor scale. If it was a major scale, let's convert it to a major scale. I'm going to raise the 3rd, 6th, and 7th. And now our F doesn't work. We could say, well, it could be a harmonic or melodic minor, and we could adjust those. Our D sharp doesn't work either. What about that 3rd? That B doesn't show up anywhere. But I think it's more likely that it's a minor scale. So let's stick with that. Okay. Now let's build our chords. So I'm just going to see if these are all the roots of our chords. I'm just going to build triads right on them. I don't hear any 7ths. So root 3rd. And then the 5th. So this chord is this D sharp chord or E flat. It's not our root chord, right? It's our 6th chord because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we don't start on the root. That's different, but fine. It's cool. Now here's what I was saying earlier. We could build chords out of these, or we could just say the chord goes all the way through there. This G happens again, so it's really only the F that's not in the chord. So we could do that, or we could build chords on all of them. Let's try building chords on all of them and see what happens. F, A, C, G, B flat, D. Now the F chord, here's going to be my root, then cycling around again, 3rd and 5th. Now my G minor chord, my tonic. The tonic is the word we use to talk about the one chord, the chord that the key is named after. Now we have another G, so it's going to be the same. And then an F, same as here. Okay. Let's get rid of my scale here. Okay, and let's hear how that sounds. Okay, that sounds pretty good. I'm not convinced on this business. He might be doing it and he might not, but let's try it without. Let's get rid of those notes and let's just stretch this here and this here, and we'll imagine that this note moves down to the F and then up to the G. So that's its own little inner line. Let's hear it like that. You know, I can hear it both ways. It's hard to tell with that distorted synth sound that he's using, but let's leave it like this. Let's go with this simpler explanation. Occam's razor. The simplest answer is always true. Okay, so we have our chords. Let's look at what they are. So we are in the key of G minor. So this is going to be our one chord, or let's do it in terms of chord names. So G minor, this one is also a G minor. Now we have a chord based on F here. So in the key of G, remember our pattern of our diatonic chord progression in minor. Let's write it out one more time. Minor, diminished, major, minor, minor, major, major. That's awfully sloppy. Minor, diminished, major, minor, minor, major, major. My pen's kind of going crazy here. So F is the 7th scale degree in the key of G. We have to go all the way up through it to get to F. So that's going to make it here, which is going to be major. So this is an F major. So we'll just write F. This one is D sharp. That's going to be in the key of G. We have to go G, and then if we counted up the scale, we would count A, B, C, D. So it would be the 6th. I guess I already said that earlier. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a major also. That gets us there. So this is going to be D sharp major, or we could call it, more accurately, we would call it E flat major. Same thing, just two different names. So we have an E flat major, an F major, a G minor, and then over here we have an F again. So those are our chords for this section of the song. Okay, let's look at the melody. So I figured out the melody for us, just the actual pitches. And this melody is really fun because it jumps around really wildly. You don't normally see that in a melody, but this kind of like really kind of frantic sound, a good way to get that sound is to take a melody and go like over an octave. So this one, it starts here, right away it goes up an octave to another G, and then it goes up even higher. So it's got this like these huge leaps like this. That makes for this really kind of almost comical melody, these like really big leaps. So let's hear just the melody. Let's hear the melody and the chords without the track. So I'm going to mute the track, unmute the melody, and let's hope this works. Okay. So let's see how these notes fit with the chords. So I'm going to jump back and forth a little bit here. So let's look at our first chord here. This is an E flat or a D sharp major, right? So let's look at what happens in this first bar. So here, all these notes are happening during the E flat major. So what are the notes of the E flat major? I'm just going to put them down here. So D sharp, there's my 2, 3, 5. And without drawing the whole key, I'm going to look back and make sure I did that right. D sharp, G, and A sharp. D sharp, G, and A sharp. There we go. Okay, so these are actually my notes in the chord. So let's see what works and what doesn't work. So the first note we have is a G. It's in the chord exactly. The second note is a G. It's in the chord right there. Our third note is an F. That's not in the chord, and that's just fine. Here we have one of those cool passing tones that we talked about in the last lesson, because it goes chord tone, non-chord tone, but then right back to a chord tone. So this little dip in the melody takes us away from the chord for just a really brief little eighth note, really quick second, and then back. The next note is an A sharp. That's in our chord. Then we have another G. That's in our chord. And then we have a D. A D is not in our chord, interestingly enough. But another passing tone. This one might be kind of an anticipation for the next chord because it leads us into this riff. But it's a non-chord tone, but most of these notes are in our chord, and that's great. So let's look at the next chord. The next chord is FAC, an F major, and that's happening here. So let's just draw it. Let's draw it right here. FAC. Okay, so there's our chord. So going up here, there's a C. So this D was kind of leading us into that C, which is a chord tone. Now I have an A sharp, which is not a chord tone, and then this big leap down to F. So we have this little melody up here having a chord tone in it and then leaving the chord tone. And then an F, and then we hold on to that for a second. Then we have an A sharp leading down to an A, so this we would more accurately call it B flat, leading into an A, so this is another passing tone that's just kind of on the road to this pitch. And then an F, which we have here, and then a D sharp, again, this note probably anticipating going into the next chord to lead us down into D. So there's kind of this stringing together of chords with the melody. So like the last note of the melody pushes us into the next chord. It's kind of what he's doing. So let's look at what our third chord is. So this is our G minor, G, A sharp, or B flat, and D. So let's build that right here. So there's our chord. This actually note is here. Maybe I'll do this so it's not confusing. Well, let's just leave it there. Okay, so just like before, this note does lead into the chord, and that leads us into the fifth note of our tonic. Then we have a C, non-chord tone, passing on its way to A sharp. Then we have an F, not a chord tone, but then back to an A sharp, which is in our chord, and then a G and an A sharp. So right here, we're just outlining the chord, actually here too. These four notes are doing nothing but arpeggiating, which we just learned in our last lesson, the chord. They're just playing the notes of the chord in order like that. See? That's all the melody's doing, is just arpeggiating. Cool, so let's get rid of those two notes. And let's look at our last chord. Actually, we have two chords here. First, it's the G minor chord again for the first half of this bar. So if we look at it, we have these two big things here. And this one is just outlining the G minor chord. G, D, A sharp, G. That is exactly the G minor chord, just playing the notes, arpeggiating the notes, going down. So that one is just outlining the chord, no non-chord tones. Then the second half of the measure is this F chord, so F, A, C. And we look over here, and we have an F, A sharp, G, F. That one's got a little kind of funkiness to it. But this kind of makes sense. We start and end on a chord tone. These two notes are not chord tones, but they're the same as we just did. So we kind of repeated these two notes, but changed the top and bottom of the pattern going down, like that. So they're non-chord tones, but that's okay. The rest of them are chord tones. So the melody here is mostly chord tones, and in a couple spots, it's just straight up arpeggiating the chords exactly as they are. And another thing we learned in this tune is that when you have a melody that has these huge leaps like that, it gives this sound that I'm having a hard time articulating. It's a sound that is kind of crazy, like a crazy person type sound, a scary monster sound, if you will, or maybe a nice sprite sound, if you will. I think this is actually the nice sprite section of the song. So this really happy kind of sound. So let's hear everything put together here. Okay. And this chunk of song actually probably works here and here. And let's do what I did in one of the other analysis, and let's see where this chord progression works. It probably works for most of the song when that bass line isn't happening. So let's get rid of the melody for a minute and just see where this chord progression fits in well. So it fits in well on this intro. Part two, I'm sure. That still works, same chord progression.
Yes! Oh my god!
Doesn't really work here, right? This is kind of the no chord part. Oh, right there, will though. Hold on. So it comes back. Where does that jump? Right there. Okay, we get the first half of it there. First half of the chord progression. This part probably still has it. It works here.
Yes! Oh my
Okay, great. And we can actually hear at the very end here, I heard this earlier in the tune, but I didn't want to stop to point it out, but it's even more obvious here, is that he has an arpeggiator going just on this chord progression. So if you listen right here, you can hear an arpeggiator just outlining the chord. You hear that kind of flute-like sound up there? Cool. So he's got an arpeggiator going just to add a little counter melody, another line happening in there to kind of thicken it up. So this whole tune is just this chord progression with this melody and with intermittent kind of no chord sections where he just goes ballistic with his big, huge bass in these kind of no chord sections. But other than that, it's just this chord progression over and over. Okay, there we go. Skrillex, Scary Monsters, Nice Sprites.